Welcome to episode 484. This week, former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn confirms the fears of many liberals when he announces that the U.S. should only allow one religion. Then we talk about the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. What does it say about America's gun laws? And would the outcome have been different if Kyle Rittenhouse was not white? Then Kaitlyn interviews author Dan Stringer about his new book, Struggling with Evangelicalism, Why I Want to Leave and What It Takes to Stay. All of that, plus orcas are attacking yachts and Phil celebrates World Toilet Day. Before we get into the podcast, I have two important announcements. First off, our next live stream for Patreon supporters is coming on Monday, November 29th at 8 p.m. And our special guest on the live stream will be Dr. John Walton, professor of Old Testament at Wheaton College. He's been on the show many times, and he'll be live to answer your questions about Genesis and the Exodus, the flood, all kinds of Old Testament stories that he has just amazing expertise about. So you don't want to miss that. If you're a Patreon supporter, mark your calendar, 8 o'clock, Monday, November 29th. The other big announcement is for everyone, and that is just in time for Christmas, we are launching Holy Post merchandise for sale on the Holy Post website. That will also go live on Monday, November 29th, Cyber Monday. You can go to our website, holypost.com, and you'll be able to get t-shirts, sweatshirts, stickers, mugs, bottles, all kinds of fun artistic designs with Holy Post logos and characters. There's all kinds of great stuff, and we'll be adding new items regularly. So, all of your holiday shopping can be done in one place. Go to holypost.com and check out the new merchandise store. Okay, on with the episode.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I am here with a delightful assortment of people. I'm here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hi, Phil.
You don't like being described as delightful?
It's my favorite adjective.
I
my
know
middle name.
You self-apply it all the time.
Yeah,
It's
my license plate.
Mr. Delightful is here. And we have Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hi there, who is actually delightful.
You are delightful, and you're
I don't accept that insult.
Christian
I didn't say anything about you, Skye.
Oh, you implied that I'm not actually delightful.
Christian is beaming in from a remote location. She's on a top secret military base conducting top secret military operations. Where are you, Christian?
I am in right outside the Norfolk Naval Yard in Portsmouth, Virginia.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cold and rainy today, but I'm looking at some really big ships that America is making.
Are they going to
be proud of ourselves?
Are they going to let you tour them on behalf of the Holy Post Podcast? You can get a mic with a little badge.
I'll see what I can do. I can do.
Okay. And Jason's here too. Hi, Jason.
Hey there.
How was your week?
I'm not supposed to say hey there anymore because apparently I sound like Kermit the Frog.
Oh, no, that's great. Hi, Kermit the Frog here. We'd love to have you sound like Kermit the Frog. How many miles did you walk today?
5. Yep. I think it was like 5.15. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
It was a good start to the day.
Jason.
You look delightful. You look delightful.
One of these days, you're just going to pull a Forrest Gump and just start walking across the country and see who follows you.
Just make sure you're handing out cinnamon rolls, and then you'll get a lot of followers.
If I start tweeting it, people will follow. Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to give that a try. And it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, we missed something 3 days ago. 3 days ago was a very special day. A listener pointed it out to me because I didn't notice it. I didn't realize what it was 3 days ago, November 19th, as we're recording this. We're recording this on a Monday, the 22nd. It was 3 days ago, November 19th. Do you know what it was? Do you know what November 19th is?
No. Veterans Day. No. That was the week before.
No.
What?
Nope. World Toilet Day.
Oh, okay.
No.
Here we go.
Can I just say one thing? Wait, one thing. Why, whenever I am on, do we have the potty news or the butt news? I'm sorry. And also, I just have to say, for one whole week, I've been taking care of my sister's wonderful 4 kids,
Yeah.
but 3 of them are in diapers, and I've had to change them a
How
lot, and I've had
many
enough
diapers
of
have
the
you changed in the last week?
butt news. I lost track. I lost count. But please, no butt news today. I've had enough of that.
Yeah, the other day I had my almost 2-year-old grandson walk up to me complaining that he was poopy. He has words now. He has vocabulary. He said poop, poop, poop. And then to prove the point, he put his hand in his diaper and showed me. Said, see?
This is why you believe them the first time.
Yes, yes. So with that in mind, it was World Toilet Day 3 days ago.
What does that mean?
I
Why
didn't.
world? It's not just like American Toilet Day?
No, America we have our toilets. I think it's about getting more people toilets for health reasons. I
that makes sense.
think that's probably what it's about. If I was like, say, the host of a podcast, I would do some research and find out before I say that. But because I'm just a guy that just shows up places, I don't know what it is.
And what authority declares it World Toilet Day? Who is the global authority here?
I'm going to say it's the United Nations or the World Health Organization. Or Jason, are you looking this up right now? Can you tell us?
It's UN Water World Toilet Day, valuing toilets. That's the subtitle.
And I will tell you, from someone that went on a mission trip to Indonesia, the hills of Indonesia, and had to use a little hole in the floor where there was only a wall to wipe your hands. I highly recommend toilets everywhere. So I am in support of this holiday.
Okay. Let's not dive into that story any farther. I know Skye has a few questions he would like to ask as a follow-up to that, but we're not going to, Skye. We're just going to walk away because we value toilets. Hey,
there's a lot of poop talk today. Let's just move on.
How much for the toilet? How do you value that toilet at? I want to buy a toilet. $9-10. I don't know.
Have you guys ever tried to buy toilets? I'm doing that right now in a renovation, and there's like 1 million choices. Did you know this?
Oh, yeah. It's easy. Just get the most expensive one. That makes it easy to decide.
They do have a lot of options now. They're becoming very complicated.
Did you see? Did any of you watch Bob's Burgers? Do you ever watch?
I have seen Bob's Burgers, but not every episode.
I have not. Fill me in.
They did an episode that was a parody. It was like a beat by beat parody of E.T., the extraterrestrial, except it was what's the little boy's name? He's out in the woods and he finds a high-tech Japanese toilet that fell off a truck. And it speaks to him. So that becomes the ET, and he's trying to save it because men are looking for it. And he decides he has to save it, so he puts it in the front basket of his bike, and he's riding his bike around with this talking toilet. It ends up at the end going off a ramp to create the iconic scene of him and his talking toilet against the moon.
Have you ever seen or used one of those kinds of toilets?
No, I'm a simple Midwestern man.
I had one when I was in Seoul, when I was in South Korea a number of years ago at my hotel. It was this toilet that had all these buttons and control panels. It was like I was sitting on R2-D2 or something, but I was so confused at all. And again, none of it's in English. It's all Korean language.
Yeah, if you're sitting on a toilet in not your house, someone else's toilet, and it has a whole remote control panel of buttons built in, do you really want to touch those buttons?
You have to.
That's what I was thinking.
You have to.
I don't even like to touch the remote control in a hotel that's, might be in a bag saying it was sanitized, but a remote control that's built into the place where you pee.
This was a very nice hotel in Seoul.
Oh, yeah. And so that means that everyone behaves.
When in Rome, you got... but it was something else. It was like...
Yeah.
It was like
how many of the options did you try out?
I don't remember how many, but there were many.
You do. You remember exactly how many.
I don't remember exactly,
You just
but
don't want to talk about it because some of them are embarrassing.
I felt like I was sitting on top of an aquatic show at Disney World. I mean, there was lights, there was music, there was sound, and it was
one point,
amazing.
the Little Mermaid was spraying my derriere.
Really, all I needed was like a $14 bottled water and a $30 hot dog, and it would have been the entire Disney experience.
That's fantastic. Did it make you, because you took a test drive in a Tesla and it made you go, oh wow,
I did do that once.
This would be fun to own. Did you have the same reaction to your R2D2 toilet?
No.
Did it wipe your bottom for you? Is that one of the options?
Christian,
that's one of the things you don't want to talk about.
What kind of program do you think we're doing here?
I don't know, but I am kind of wondering how many options can there honestly be? I mean,
there's
heat, like
there's a fan, there's music. Was there music?
Yeah, there was sound.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
sound
it goes
effects? Sound effects? Is it for humor's sake?
No.
Oh, no.
I didn't find that button.
No.
The
humor button.
But
it just makes fart noises.
That's enough. Let's move on.
It has been a celebration of World Toilet Day 2021. We will return in a year to see what nice toilet Skye has sat on next. Okay.
I'm about to buy 4 of them, so I'm going to go and look for one of those, and I'll report back.
Wow. It's like those chairs. Those chairs, they're also very popular in Japan that massage you in 35 different ways and cost $5,000. Have a remote control. Too much furniture with remote controls. Furniture and plumbing should not have remote controls.
We're going to have apps next. That's what's going to happen. Toilet with an app.
We still have a hard time getting our Apple TV to wake up sometimes. I don't want to have the same problem with my toilet. I need my toilet to be awake when I need it.
I guarantee this is coming, but you'll probably get an app where you can put your individualized preferences and settings so that no matter what toilet you sit on, it knows what you want.
Well, yeah, because it'll do the butt reading thing that we talked about earlier to identify you by your unique fingerprint.
Oh, man. Do we have some real news today?
Nature is sick of us. We've finally done it. Nature is sick of us. Orcas on the coast of Spain and Gibraltar are beginning to attack boats.
I saw that.
Did you see that? The first signs that something odd was taking place came in July 2020. Just as Europe began to open up sailing once again, there were reports from Gibraltar and the Spanish coast of orca attacks on yachts. And so it was like just a guy, I'm sailing my yacht because that's what we do. All Spaniards have a yacht and they sail it around Gibraltar. And suddenly orcas start attacking the ship and biting the rudder. And they kept going for like an hour. For an hour, orcas were attacking his rudder until they bit it completely off and he couldn't steer his boat and had to be towed back into shore. Okay, so that's weird. That's weird, right?
They're very obviously intelligent animals, and I assume this is some kind of playful game that they have that they go after rudders.
They really don't know why it's happening. It's not a game, but
what fun for an orca.
It's getting more and more pronounced.
But we know that like orcas are very social animals, and they actually they learn from one another, and different packs of orcas learn from one another. And if this becomes it's like the TikTok trend of kids stealing bathroom fixtures out of middle schools and stuff.
Exactly what it is.
That's what it is. They're doing it for TikTok.
Yes, if we just followed orca TikTok, we would know why it's growing. Within 6 months, there had been around 40 such incidents of orca attacks on the rudders of boats. This summer, the situation escalated from June to mid-July 2021 alone. There were 53 reported orca attacks on the rudders of boats. one guy that it's happened to said I think we were hit on the rudder 100 or 200 times. It was consistent. They were around for a solid hour. We put our sails down, which is what apparently you're supposed to do if orcas are trying to kill you. Stop sailing and just sit there and wait for the end. And eventually they did go away, but they were gone for 20 minutes and then they came back. They were very focused on their task. That's an exact quote. They were focused on their task. The orcas are turning on us. What's next? Dolphins is next. Then it's going to work all the way down the food chain until you're walking down the street and krill start jumping out of drains at you. The whole world is in revolt against us.
It's like what Cousin Eddie said to Clark. If an orca comes at your... What?
Cousin Eddie?
Yeah.
Clark?
From Family Vacation.
What are we talking about? Oh.
When the dog goes at him?
I just needed some context.
When an orca is going after your rudder, it's best to just let him finish.
Wait. Oh. I don't think I like that analogy. And
what else are you going to do? You can't fight them.
Yeah, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Well, I have a theory of why this is happening.
Oh, yeah, please.
So do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic when, and I can't believe it. I mean, it's really going on almost 2 years. In March, it'll be 2 years since that whole thing started. But do you remember, like, during that 3 months, all of a sudden the animals came out of hiding?
Yeah.
And it was like the whole earth of nature took a big breath and they seemed so happy.
There were penguins walking around the field museum.
Yes, they were everywhere. They were just loving life. And I think now they're really mad. Like they're mad that we've stepped back and, we've kind of taken over their space. And
they thought we'd left. They thought, we thought you left. Oh, we were so happy to see you go. And here you are again. Well, we're going to bite your rudders because we've figured out if your rudder don't work, you can't go anywhere.
Can't bother us.
How big a yacht or boat or ship will they actually go after?
It said this year they're getting bigger. They're going after, and they've started going after this year catamarans too, which have two rudders, and they're going after both of them to disable a catamaran.
It's like
they're learning, Skye. They're getting smarter.
There are other features of a boat that they could go after, like the keel on a sailboat or an anchor, but would they always go, or the propeller in some cases, but they always go after the rudders. That's interesting.
Yeah, except for certain boats that don't have rudders because they have a steering propeller. And in those cases, they've actually gone after the propeller. Whatever steers the boat, they're going to take it out. The orcas are onto us and they're organized and they're teaching this lesson to each other. So maybe that's why the shipping issues are happening, because the orcas are disrupting the supply chain.
I don't think there's a lot of supply chain on sailboats.
They know our weakness. They know what? All boats have rudders. Even
no, they don't.
Most boats have rudders. Most boats have rudders. Big boats, ships. They're taking us down. I think this is their plan to take over the world. Okay. That's animal news for the day. We're in trouble because the orcas are fed up. And they're not going to take it anymore. Don't even try going to SeaWorld right now. That's a big mistake.
Do they still have orcas at SeaWorld to begin with? I thought those were done with.
They were phasing out the show. I don't know if they were phasing out the orcas.
Well, the problem is they can't just return all those orcas to the wild because so many of them were born in captivity and they don't know how to survive in the wild.
Maybe those are the ones that are leading the attacks on ships. Where's our fish?
Yeah.
We had a deal. I jump, you give me fish. Okay, can I go on?
Please.
Michael Flynn is in the news. You remember Michael Flynn?
He's a character.
Piece of work.
General Michael Flynn, friend of the Trump, arrested for lying to the FBI, but then pardoned by Trump. He was
and importantly, he pleaded guilty. So
yes, guilty.
Yeah, he pleaded guilty. He said he did it.
I did it. I lied to the FBI. I did it. And you respect the rule of law, right? Oh, we don't? Okay, I'm free. That's how that went down. He was at an event called what was it called? What was the event called? Oh, rats. No, that's not the name of the event, but it was at a big church in former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn caused a firestorm. Oh, here it is, with his recent comments on November 13th at the Reawaken America tour in San Antonio. Because as we all know, America has fallen asleep.
But
Been sleeping.
isn't reawaken awfully close to woke?
Oh. America needs to be awoke.
Oh, reawakened. Reawokened.
Let's do a reawokened tour just to confuse people. Like, wait, which side are you on? If we're going to have, and this was his quote that got people's attention, if we're going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion. Okay, nation needs one religion. America was he didn't even say it was supposed to have one religion, but it needs to have one religion.
This, even just on the face of it, the logic doesn't hold up. Right?
Mm-hmm.
One nation under God does not mean one religion under God.
Well, my guess is he's thinking that only the Christian faith acknowledges the one true God.
Yeah, all other gods are false. You don't believe in Zeus, do you, Skye?
No, but he's just throwing red meat to a crowd that it doesn't care if what you're saying actually makes historical or logical sense.
Well, how about this? Flynn, and this is Ed Stetzer wrote a piece about this. It kind of went a little bit viral. The Rolling Stone magazine wrote a piece, and it was interesting. I grabbed it because basically it's an overreaction, but it's basically saying, he said the quiet part out loud. This is what conservative Christians want. They want theocracy. We've suspected it all along. If conservative Christians take control, it's going to be theocracy and then Handmaid's Tale. Yeah, that's where it always goes.
Mm-hmm.
So the tour was organized by Clay Clark, who's a podcast host. You have to keep an eye on those podcast hosts because where's the oversight? Where's the accountability? Zero. You can have anyone on your show. You can say whatever you want and go out to billions of people, and no one even notices. Guardian calls this guy a media figure and Christian entrepreneur. He's doing this tour, the Reawaken America tour, which I guess you drive across America tickling it. Has included stops in Florida, Michigan, California, and Texas. So basically anywhere there's a militia. Do you have militias in your state? We'll go there. Flynn followed the pattern of Christian nationalism by taking a biblical passage aimed at Christ's disciples and applying it to the United States. This is a great quote. This is from Michael Flynn, the esteemed general. You have to believe this, that God Almighty is like involved in this country. That's a pretty rich theological statement right there. God Almighty is like involved in this country because this is it. This is the shining city on the hill.
Well, but he's loosely quoting Reagan, who was quoting John Winthrop, the Puritan in, was it 1620?
Right. This is it.
Yeah.
This is the shining city on a hill from the Bible.
Mm-hmm. That's what Jesus meant in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
America.
Yeah. Can I just say one thing?
Jesus knows what's coming. He knew we were coming.
All of those pilgrims that left England, so they would not have to be forced to worship in the one religion that the state decides.
That is not that is not entirely why they left.
Oh, you're going to get schooled, Christian.
I mean, you're right, Christian.
I'm sorry for what's about to happen.
No. You're right, Christian. I know it's Thanksgiving week. This is when we talk about that. But what people forget is John Winthrop and the other Puritans who settled in Massachusetts Bay. They did not oppose state-run religion. In fact, they established a state-run church in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they kicked out people, excommunicated them, people like Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson and others who didn't conform to their religious polity or their religious rules. So the Puritans did not come because they believed in religious freedom. They didn't believe in religious freedom. They believed in theocracy. They just didn't want to live in a nation where the theocracy was Roman Catholic or Anglican to the point where they didn't like what they were doing. So they wanted to separate to create their own theocracy, which is exactly what they did in Massachusetts. So religious freedom was not a concept that the Pilgrims agreed with.
So what you're saying is, Skye, let me see if I'm getting you right,
Yeah.
that Michael Flynn is right.
I'm saying no, Michael Flynn is very wrong, because what ended up being developed from people like Roger Williams, who were excommunicated by the Puritans, was then the colony of Rhode Island. And Rhode Island was established on the premise of religious freedom, which then became the model that the founders put into the Constitution and the First Amendment.
But it wasn't an island, so it was also founded on lies.
Yes, Rhode Island is a lie.
So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why then are we told that the Pilgrims left England in order to, be free to worship how they want? Number one.
Okay, sorry.
They did leave England. They did leave England to worship the way they wanted.
The way they wanted.
Right, but they did not extend that right to anyone else. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, and so what you're saying is this history is very nuanced and complicated, and we cannot boil it down so that a 5-year-old can understand it. So we just say, they left because they wanted religious freedom.
They wanted the freedom to practice their religion.
Right. But they did not extend that freedom to anyone else.
Now, so this is what I think goes wrong. I think what goes wrong is when we're 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe up to 10.
15.
We hear a thing like, we're going to America for religious freedom. And then we don't ever think more deeply than that.
Right.
We don't look into it very deeply. And so we just assume that that's how our nation was founded. And that means it's, got to be our religion. And I don't know, it all goes downhill from there.
I'll make it even slightly more complicated and further the Thanksgiving dynamics of this story. Roger Williams, who was a committed Christian and a Puritan, disagreed with the idea that if you disobeyed a church rule, that the civil authorities could punish you for it. So, for example, this isn't necessarily from Roger Williams, but like we would all agree that it is against Christian ethics to commit adultery. And Roger Williams agreed it's wrong to commit adultery, but he didn't believe that the civil authorities, the government of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, should be able to punish you for violating a religious commandment. Does that make sense? Yep. So because he took this stance, Roger Williams was banished by the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Church of Massachusetts, which was synonymous with the government, kicked him out of the colony in the middle of winter in Massachusetts and banished him into the wilderness, fully expecting that he would freeze to death and die as punishment from God for standing up for religious freedom. Guess who it was that took him in, fed him, clothed him, gave him a warm shelter, and helped him survive through the winter?
The Indians.
It was the Native Americans.
Pocahontas.
And then he went on to found the Rhode Island colony and give religious freedom, including to Native Americans, and saw them as equal in the eyes of God. That's the principle that the United States ended up being founded on.
That idea didn't seem to catch on about the Native Americans.
No, it didn't. But early on, there were people like Roger Williams who understood that dynamic. Though being a committed Christian, he wasn't willing to demonize and eliminate people who disagreed with him. Whereas the Massachusetts Bay Colony leaders like John Winthrop and others, the guy who said this place will be a shining city on a hill, they didn't have any tolerance for people that disagreed with them, even within their own community. So anyway, I think it's an interesting idea that the religious freedom that so many conservative Christians are now trying to defend was really practiced by people who were ostracized and kicked out of the religious community, the Christian community, at the founding or before the founding of our country. So anyway,
Skye,
there's your little history lesson.
Skye, I just have to say that I'm really impressed with something. I picked a random story about Michael Flynn, and you turned it into a Thanksgiving lesson for Thanksgiving week. You themed my story to this week.
I think that I did that.
Christian, I'm really impressed with something. You did it. You went to a naval yard and themed my Orca story to big ships. Okay, So Ed Stetzer, our buddy Ed Stetzer, has been on the show a couple times. He wrote a piece in the USA Today. Why in USA Today? Because clearly he's an evangelical elite. So that's where we want to write our stories. And he said this was an example of the great sort. He sees a great sort happening among churches because the reaction to this has been very polarized, with a lot of people, Christians saying, yes, Michael Flynn, tell it like it is, and other Christians saying, this is nuts, this is crazy. He says this is an example of how moderate Christians are losing kind of their place in Christian society, and churches are being sorted into your political ideology. So, and others have pointed out that you see a much more likelihood to promote the use of violence, that we may have to resort to violence to save America, among Christians who believe that America is supposed to be Christian. It was founded to be Christian, and we may have to, as somebody stood up at a Charlie Kirk meeting of Turning Point, his conservative group, someone stood up and say, when do we get to use guns? That was literally the question during the Q&A period, was, when do we get to use guns? People are excited about the idea that eventually this is going to come to violence and we're going to have to take sides.
In other words, when do we get to use guns in the name of Jesus?
Yes.
That makes sense.
Jesus guns. That's because Jesus, he had guns. If you ever saw him without a shirt on, Jesus had guns. Ed Stetzer does a pretty good job going through religious history and American history and just pointing out the fundamental issue that Jesus didn't come to found a theocracy. And even though people wanted him to, and he was killed partly because they were so disappointed that he didn't do what Michael Flynn wants to do, which is establish his reign politically and through coercive political power. And that's not how it's supposed to work. So Stetzer ends, we may have him on to talk about this at some point. Flynn is right about one thing. God is at work in this country, yet his vision of a reestablished church so sadly, Michael Flynn's vision of a reestablished church so sadly misses the point. God's involvement in this country, indeed his involvement in the whole world, will not come through coercion. Rather, he's already working to revive and renew through thousands of churches who choose sacrifice and forgiveness over power and domination. So that's his conclusion. Somebody did a really good podcast I recently listened to. I'm trying to remember who it was. It might have been Mike Erie on the cruciform church. That the church is, the model for the church is the cross. The model for the Christian life is the cross. It is cruciform. It is about dying for the benefit of others. It's giving up power. It's not grabbing power. And so this whole Christian nationalistic movement is just Christianity turned upside down. Christian?
Well, that reminds me of Skye's devotional today.
I didn't read it.
It does.
What was it?
Yeah, basically, it was everybody in the Bible promoting a pattern of not de-escalation. What word did you use, Skye?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Instead of climbing the ladder of success,
it's downward mobility.
Downward mobility.
Yes.
That's what you said. Yeah,
Yes.
it's like Jesus set the example. Who else did you talk about? Moses set the example of leaving this place where they were, had a right to be, stepping away and being downwardly mobile. So.
Exactly.
Can we? Well, I love Ed's article. Totally concur. Totally agree with it. Grateful he wrote it.
No, it's okay. It's okay, fancy toilet boy. What do you got?
Like when are more people going to step forward? Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. Someone's
your
at the door.
dogs are barking.
Why don't we have more people just come right out and say these ideas of Christian nationalism, especially when they're promoted by people who claim to be Christian leaders and are promoted in our churches, is a false gospel and heretical. And it is a utter rejection of Jesus Christ. Like, that's what needs to be said. This is not
what Ed
said. What's that?
That's kind of what Ed said.
Right. I know it's kind of what he said, but I wish more people would just flat out say it. Like, this is demonic. This is antichrist. This is an utter repudiation of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And until you use that strong of the language, I think we keep playing footsie with this stuff and like we're going, oh, this is bad and this is a corruption of what Jesus said, blah, blah, blah. But we're not like flat out saying this is Antichrist.
Yeah. Well,
actually,
you should say that. Go ahead,
yeah,
say it.
you have a
Skye.
great Twitter
Say it.
platform, both of you. So, and the thing is, I do think you have said that to a degree, and not only you, there have been others. And when you speak out like that, you're labeled as a heretic, which is confusing to many because basically we're saying people like Michael Flynn are being heretical, and so then the common man says, well, who are we supposed to believe?
Well, the truth is, Christian, I am
Skye.
being a heretic. I am absolutely being a heretic if you believe the God we are to worship is the United States.
Oh.
And that's the problem, is we get labeled that way because we won't bow our knee to the same idol that they are.
And it all goes back to the Vietnam War.
Oh.
How's that, Phil?
Segue, Phil?
I know, because I was kind of wrestling with in my head, and Christian Cobes Dumais has written about this as well. At what point did conservative Christians become the biggest promoters of America, and the military, and we must be strong, this country must be strong? And her conclusion was it was kind of the dichotomy of the Cold War, when we were opposing the godless communists, and then the unpopularity of Vietnam, where people were attacking America for being morally wrong. And that was so, and then the hippies that were protesting the war, and so it just seemed like, if you're against us, you're a communist. Kennedy was a communist. Martin Luther King was a communist. All the protesters in the street were communists. People standing up for civil rights were communists. Everyone was a communist. And we, the Christians, have to stand up for America, which partly means blessing our military intervention in Vietnam, because that's what was happening right then, which set the course for the 70s, the 80s, and Reagan saying we should be proud of America, not ashamed of America, because we're the shining city on the hill. We're the shining city on the hill. That's where that came in, because we were embarrassed of America because of Vietnam, and then the Honda Civic was a better car, and that was terrible, and the Japanese were going to take over everything. So it was Vietnam, it was the Honda Civic, and then it was Ronald Reagan.
Here's what bothers me about all that, though, Phil.
Tell me what I've won.
It's an oversimplification of true patriotism.
Okay.
Like, here's the metaphor. Somebody said this some years ago, and I'll botch it a little bit, but like a 5-year-old loves their mom and dad. And a 5-year-old appreciates that their mom and dad feeds them and clothes them and gives them a home and everything. And they idolize their mom and dad, and their mom and dad can do no wrong whatsoever. And that's how a lot of people think about patriotism. America is like our extended family. They're like our parents, and we owe everything to America, and America can do no wrong. And what we're called to, especially as Christians, is a more mature love of our parents. Like, as an adult, I love my mother and my father. I am grateful for what they have given me. I am indebted to them for the rest of my life for all that they provided and nurtured me and all that. But as an adult, I'm also able to recognize the flaws in my mother and the flaws in my father, and I'm able to discern this is what's really admirable about them, and this is what is a shortcoming of theirs. And when they do wrong or flat out sin, I can see that and acknowledge it. And so it's a mature love. It's a mature appreciation.
Would you like to take this opportunity to list some of the flaws of your mother and father?
Let's have a therapy session. But I think that's what we're called to with America. I'm deeply indebted to this country, and I appreciate everything I have is because of this country. And it has nurtured me and provided for me in remarkable ways, but I'm not ignorant to its shortcomings and failures. And the ability to love and respect a country while at the same time acknowledging its failures is what a good citizen has to do. And what some of these Christian nationalists are asking us to do is to love America like a 5-year-old loves their mom. And that's not a mature, godly, responsible way to engage. And that's what, and then when you point out anything in America that is a shortcoming or a failure or a sin in its past, well, you hate America. No, it's ridiculous. Just like if I were to point out some failure that my mom or dad made, doesn't mean I don't love and respect them.
Okay. Christian, you with him or?
Well, I am, and it reminds me of what I shared a long time ago of C.S. Lewis's idea of a healthy versus a demoniac patriotism. One of the quotes I just kind of looked it up. I love this. He says, "Demoniac patriotism in people will make it easier for them to act wickedly. Healthy
Mm,
patriotism may make it harder. When they are
Right.
wicked, they may, by propaganda, encourage a demoniac condition of our sentiments in order to secure our acquiescence in their wickedness. If they are good, they could do the opposite. This is one reason why we private persons should keep a wary eye on the health or disease of our own love of country."
that's good. So this Thanksgiving, we should be thankful for our country,
Yes.
but also not blind to its faults and not
Yes.
elevating it to a position where countries don't belong. And that's hard, but that's where it
Exactly.
gets hard though, because if you believe that America has been chosen for a unique role in history, it is hard to avoid putting it in a position where it doesn't belong.
Well, and that's the funny part is if you actually read the Old Testament, which is about a covenant people that God did choose for a very special role in history,
Yeah.
even they were not above criticism because the prophets are come along and others come along and they flat out call out Israel's sin and rebellion, and the Lord holds them
Mm,
accountable for it. And he even tells them when he makes the covenant with them in Exodus, if you don't worship me and if you don't treat one another justly, I will take the land away from you. This
yeah.
is not an unconditional license to do whatever you want. So, if that was true of Israel, with whom God did have a special covenant, how much more true is that of the United States, with whom he does not have a special covenant? We don't get a pass on our unrighteous behaviors and sinfulness.
But he
I
does
find
have a
it so
special covenant with, hey, I was talking. Never mind. Christian.
No. It's so sorry. I didn't hear you talking, and
Oh,
I think it's the lag.
I was just gonna
Yeah,
say he does have a special covenant with Wheaton, Illinois. So that's a point where we can get a little more incensed.
clearly.
Christian.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting. We can, as evangelical Christians, recognize the Jews' erroneous thinking when they were expecting, God to come back as a military leader and destroy Rome. And yet we sit here and now expect the exact same thing. We
Yeah.
think Jesus is going to come back and, take over and
Take over
establish
Harvard.
America as its, shining city on, its
Yeah.
New Jerusalem or whatever. And it just, I don't know. I think another thing that's very sad is that a lot of people may not travel very much outside the United States. And I think if you are able to travel outside the United States or meet other people from other countries, you begin to realize that we have such a myopic view of America
Yeah.
and the way that we think about that. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about today, and we're kind of out of time, but I wanted to just mention at some point, some of the reactions we're seeing to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict, which happened last week, and how Christians are responding. There was a very interesting piece. Kyle Rittenhouse is a 17-year-old that went up to Kenosha, Wisconsin, with a assault rifle to help protect stuff, and ended up shooting 3 people, claiming self-defense. And he was found not guilty on the grounds of self-defense. David French wrote a piece that is worth reading in the Atlantic on the technicality of the defense probably was accurate, that
Right.
that's the way self-defense law tends to work in America, and specifically in this case in Wisconsin, that because people were acting aggressively toward him, he probably by law had the right to defend himself. But so he kind of sets aside that part of it, and says instead, though, what he did was profoundly irresponsible and profoundly foolish. And for people to put him up on a pedestal as a hero, is, and this is from a very conservative writer, is just wrong. It's just completely wrong to put that sort of behavior up on a pedestal. As now, people are offering him internships in Congress, and he could have his own Newsmax talk show if he wanted at this point. So he's pointing out the ridiculousness of that, even while saying, like it or hate it, that's kind of the state of self-defense law in America.
Yeah. There's a logic, though legally and technically correct, to his defense, which is just stunning. And it was essentially this. He was arguing that he feared someone might take his gun from him and use it on him. So he was justified in shooting these people because he chose to bring a gun to this event. So in
Yeah,
other words,
and
I can use my gun because I brought my gun because I'm threatened that somebody might take my gun.
yeah, and then the first person he shot hit him with the skateboard, so he was under attack. The second person he shot went after his gun because he had shot the first person, so
Right.
he was under attack again. The third person he shot took out a gun to shoot him because he was shooting people. So
Right.
it kind of shows you.
And none of this would have happened had he not been walking down the street with an assault rifle.
Right.
So he
Right.
provoked the response that justified him feeling threatened and then killing people, which shows the flawed logic of the open carry laws that are now coming about all over the country. The argument is if people see you have a gun, they're not going to
Mess
come
with you.
they're not going to mess with you. You're going to create a safer society. But in reality, when you bring a gun, it also provokes people who feel threatened by your presence, which then when they feel threatened, you feel threatened, which means you're justified in shooting them.
But if we
So
all have a gun, if everybody has a gun, if we just give them out when you graduate from high school, so everyone has a gun, then no one will feel threatened.
exactly. And this is the argument I had with David French the first time he was on to debate gun policy in this country. And obviously he's a constitutional scholar and a Harvard trained attorney, and he can run circles around me on the legal arguments. But the question I have to ask as just a Christian and as a minister is this the kind of society we want? And is this the kind of society that Jesus is calling us to cultivate? One in
Right.
which everyone is armed all the time, and a 17-year-old kid or people who are protesting a Black Lives Matter rally, suddenly it becomes a life or death event because everyone's armed. And my view of human nature is reformed enough to believe that we are depraved and we should not all be walking around with guns all the time.
I totally agree. The only other angle that I think is worth bringing in is our friend Robert P. Jones, who was on the show just a couple of weeks ago, wrote a piece bringing up the racial angle to that, which is probably something that a lot of people have thought of. And Robert P. Jones writes, "There's no doubt in my mind that if Rittenhouse's skin were black, or the skin color or likely religion of the characters from Aladdin, acquitted on all accounts would not be today's headline. The court system would likely not have let him walk away from killing 2 people and wounding another. He certainly would not have received massive funding for his legal defense from a conservative white Christian crowdfunding site." The fact that he had $2 million to spend on his defense is it's not typical for a young child with a gun in America. And a black Kyle Rittenhouse wouldn't be celebrated by prominent white Republican elected officials who love to wear their Christian identity on their sleeve, including 3 that have offered him internships in their congressional offices. A black figure openly carrying an assault weapon and boldly approaching law enforcement officers likely would have been shot rather than given water by police in the streets of Kenosha that night. And he certainly would not have been sent on his way by police in an armored vehicle with this comradely benediction: "We appreciate you guys. We really do."
That's the part I find most appalling.
Yeah.
Really. Why didn't the police officers say, listen, you need to get out of here. You are a teenager. You have a deadly weapon. This is not safe for you. It's not safe for us. It's not safe for anybody else. Get out of here. Leave, or arrest him and make him leave. If one of the protesters had shown up with that kind of firepower, they would have been arrested.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Christian.
I think it might be interesting at some point for us to bring on somebody in the military or in the police force to talk about the culture there. because I do know a lot of active duty military. I've been around them now for a long time because of my own sons. And there is a specific culture in both the military and the, police departments that are similar to what you're seeing. And that's a broad generalization, I know. But I am curious because I feel like what I have heard in those circles mirrors what you're seeing and speaking to, Skye. And we think one way about our military and our policemen, and we think they should be I guess apolitical in the way that they express their politics or their sentiments, but they are real people and they do have political opinions, and they may not be ones that we would expect. And I think it would be interesting to hear about that culture, because I think that's what you're seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, David French could probably speak to that. He's got quite a bit of military history as well. It's just you can look at this whole thing from a gun control perspective, from a white nationalism perspective, from a racial perspective. There are a lot of angles, and they're all fairly concerning.
Do you agree with Jones that would not be the outcome if he was Black?
I think the situation would have been different. Yes, based on just the fact that if you're an average Wisconsin police officer, he might look like your son. So you're thinking, hey, I know kids like that. I trust, and that's one of the big problems we have, is that we trust people that we can identify with, and we don't trust people that we can't identify with. So even if he had just could have been the same guy but wearing a Sikh turban, you'd say, I cannot relate to this person. I do not trust this person. I'm going to approach this person completely differently than if he looks like my son or my cousin or my little brother. If he looks like my little brother, I think I can predict how he's going to behave. If he looks like someone I've seen on TV or someone I've interacted with in the inner city in a negative way, now I have a whole different posture. And, that's really hard to avoid, because that's how we make snap judgments about the person approaching me that I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there's two different issues here, though. There is how the police reacted to Kyle Rittenhouse on the night of this incident, and then there's how the judge and jury reacted to him in the courtroom. I would like to believe that in an impartial judicial system, if Kyle Rittenhouse had been Black, the court would have ruled the same way, technically on the law, that it was self-defense. I'm not sure that's the case. It's what I would like to believe. However, if you go back to the incident of the night, I'm absolutely convinced that if he was a Black young man carrying an assault rifle in that environment, the police would not be handing him a bottle of water and thanking him for...
We appreciate, thank you for your service.
So that is beyond doubt in my mind. So that's the problem. And you can't ignore the racial dimensions of the outcome of this case. You just can't. Not in this country.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap it up. It's Thanksgiving. We're thankful for what God has given us. We're thankful to be Americans living in America. We're also thankful to be Christians in the church. And we're thankful for lots of things. And I hope you are too. And we're also thankful for everybody. Every day or so, we see a couple more people sign up on Patreon to support us. And I just got to say, God bless you guys. That is so kind, because it's helping us pay people. It's helping us pay for all the tech stuff that we do that sometimes works. And we're actually able to set aside time to do this, not feeling like, well, now how am I going to feed my children? So it's really nice. We really appreciate it. We're thankful for you. Happy Thanksgiving. And we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Are you a ministry leader with an entrepreneurial bent? You like to start new things? Or maybe you're in the marketplace and you've always wanted to go into seminary and learn more theology and Bible, but just lack the bandwidth to really engage. Maybe you're a bivocational pastor without the resources or capacity for traditional Bible training in school. What if you could combine the essentials of biblical education with MBA-level marketplace expertise? And what if you could do this by learning from experts like Andy Crouch of Praxis Labs, Tricia Feliz of Redmark Group, Dave Evans from Stanford's Life Design Lab, and your very own Skye. The Ray Bakke Certificate of Biblical and Entrepreneurial Thinking launches this January. It's an online class that exists to bring practical application to biblical understanding. You can sign up for individual courses for just $150 per course, or you can register for all 9 courses and get a discount plus credit toward a master's program. So head on over to thegrowcenter.com, where you can view the syllabus, see the different courses and instructors, and register today to be part of the Ray Bakke Certificate of Biblical and Entrepreneurial Thinking. Again, it's thegrowcenter.com. Thanks to the Grow Center for sponsoring this episode. Earlier in the show, we talked about how we need to love our country with a mature, healthy love that sees both its benefits and its struggles. Well, that theme kind of continues with our guest today, Dan Stringer. He's written a new book called Struggling with Evangelicalism: Why I Want to Leave and What It Takes to Stay. There are some people who are thrilled that evangelicalism is struggling right now and be happy if it just all burned to the ground. And then there's others who are fiercely defending everything within evangelicalism and maybe turning a blind eye to some of the problems. Well, Dan Stringer says that we also need a more mature vision of our heritage as Christians within the evangelical movement, recognizing both what is really good, but also what may be problematic and needs to change. He sat down with Kaitlyn to talk about his own story, coming from a biracial family and an international upbringing that gave him the tools to look more carefully at the evangelical American subculture, as he guides us to think more biblically and critically about our own future within this movement. Here's the interview with Dan Stringer.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, I've had such a great time this last week reading your book. It's so relevant right now, I think, especially for people who listen to the Holy Post who are coming from evangelicalism or are sort of still in spaces that are evangelical or are figuring out what that means. And so I have way more questions than I have time to ask you because I think it's really important. But first, will you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? I know you are a pastor and you work for a university, but what kind of does that look like for you?
Yeah, so my full-time role is with InterVarsity as a team leader, campus minister with graduate students and faculty specifically. So InterVarsity, most people know as an organization with a focus on undergrad students, college students, but there's a little part of InterVarsity that focuses on grad students and faculty because we want to reach the whole university. And then I also work part-time at our church as a pastor of theological formation here at Wellspring Covenant, which is actually where I'm sitting right now because it's nice and quiet in the office.
That's great. Yeah, I've gotten to know the InterVarsity graduate program here at Duke, and it is really great to have people who are, especially a lot of the science people, struggling with questions about their faith and the work that they do, to have people doing stuff like that. So that's important.
Exactly.
Would you tell me a little bit about your journey with evangelicalism, what your background looks like? I want to get later into how we were even defining terms and things like that, but what kind
Good
of
luck.
Yes. What kind of background with that do you have that would lead you to kind of want to write a book about struggling with it?
Yeah, well, I think the first part of my life, 0 to 20, age 20, was all about struggling with where is home. And that was because I was raised in 5 different countries as the child of medical missionary. So I was born here in Hawaii, but from the age of 7 to 18, roughly, we lived in Canada, Congo, which was Zaire at the time, Nepal, and the Philippines. And then I went to Wheaton College as an undergrad when I was 18. But, those key formative years of my life, especially as a teenager, we were moving to different parts of Asia, Africa, because of my dad's work in public health as a dentist. And I never knew where home was because I had a US passport, but, hadn't spent a huge chunk of my, formative years there, and was always, searching for that identity in addition to geographic nationality. There was also the racial aspect of being someone with a Chinese American mom and a white American dad. And so that was really the struggle that was on my mind when I chose Wheaton College, because I knew there would be other missionary kids there, other third culture kids, as we're called, TCKs. And then when I got there, I learned that there was this thing called evangelicalism that they kept trying to teach us about, because that was one of the primary adjectives that the school used to identify itself as an evangelical school. And so, learning about what that term meant. And over time, the next 20 years was about figuring out where I was at home spiritually, and starting to connect the threads that, despite all the geographic changes and denominations that we were part of, and different congregations for a variety of reasons, evangelicalism became the common thread that helped me to make sense of that journey, as much of a struggle as it was, and still is. So that's sort of how it went from a search for home to a search for a spiritual home.
Yeah. One of the things I love about your book is that you talk very early on and then throughout about kind of shifting our perspective when we use this word from a brand or a label to a space. And you use the metaphors of a neighborhood or a family. And I appreciate that so much, because it is a difficult conversation to have, where if I'm talking to someone who grew up in an evangelical church or in evangelical institutions, like, we kind of know what we mean most of the time when we're using that word, and we have shared
Hmm.
experiences and language. But then when we get kind of into specifics of defining what that means, or how we're using it in the media, or, in our own self-identification, it gets really complicated. So could you talk a little bit about why you wanted to shift to that language of space, or what that means? I think it could be helpful for people to kind of figure out what the kind of shift that you want to do is.
That's a great question. And that's a huge piece of what led me to, pursue this at length. It started off as blog posts, then it became articles, and eventually it became this book, because there was so much to struggle with. And initially it was, do I want to be with the people who call themselves evangelical or not? And sometimes it was yes, but a lot of the time it was no, especially during election season, or when the conversation was about politics.
Yeah.
But um, after a number of years of wrestling with, do I identify with this word or not? It started to shift more towards, well, why is it that it's such a tough decision depending on the context? Because in one sense, most listeners of this program might, know some of the downsides of using the word and being misunderstood, or being, you know, stereotyped in a certain way, or just affiliated with something you don't want to be affiliated with. And so, if that was all that there was to the label, it would just be a slam dunk, and okay, done with it. It's just like, other words that don't mean anything to me. And then there's this other part of it that describes not just Christian faith, but a particular type of faith, a particular expression of faith that has its own contours and traits and features. And that's something that, as much as we try to call it something else, put another adjective in front of Christian, red letter Christian, or progressive Christian, or, postmodern, missional, there's different words that we've used, but that E word, evangelical Christian, keeps coming back as a really useful identifier that points to the specificity and particularity of this particular type of faith that we practice. So,
Mm.
on that side of things, it was a really useful word that helps us to actually be honest about being a particular type of Christian in a particular space of Christianity, and not just the whole thing, and not, you know, assuming that we're kind of the neutral um, type of Christian that everybody is, but we're a particular type. And so that's how I shifted more from thinking about, well, it's less about the label for me, because sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no in terms of whether to use it. And I think that's not so much the point of the book as much as it is, well, what about inhabiting this space that the label points to? There's an entity that the adjective evangelical points to, the noun evangelicalism. And then that's where the real work, I think, is in terms of, do we want to live here or not? And what does it mean? Because it's one thing to change labels, it's another thing to change homes and to relocate yourself into a new spiritual habitat.
Yeah, I so resonated with that because you're right. It is really easy right now for a lot of people to just sort of say, yeah, I don't use that word. But there's obviously more going on for us to kind of wrestle with what that identity means for us. And sometimes going through all of there's the political meaning, there's the theological meaning, there's the cultural meaning, doesn't really get at the experience most of us have of kind of knowing what I know what it means when I say I grew up evangelical. It doesn't have to, it includes all those categories, but it also is more than all of those categories.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about why it's important for evangelicals in particular, but probably, I mean, for all Christians, to recognize ourselves as coming from a specific tradition, for kind of knowing, as you just were describing, the place that we're in, how, like, where we're located in the broader church? Because it seems to me that's something that's doing something positive for us when we recognize that. But I'd love to hear you just talk about it's especially difficult for evangelicals to do that. We tend to think of ourselves as not a specific tradition or having a history, but why might it be really important for us to understand that?
Yes, that's a great question. I think growing up outside of the US, but with a US passport, helped me to be in touch more with what that meant to be an American citizen in a place where not everybody was. In fact, very few people were in those missionary communities that I was part of. Many of them, even if they came from, English speaking Western countries, it might be Australia or New Zealand or Scotland or other, Canada. And so I had to figure out, what does it mean to be particularly American, and sort of recognize that there's so much diversity of folks who have US passports. And yet at the same time, there is something very specific about being from this particular country instead of one of the other 200 something countries in the world. And I think that that awareness helped me to see that the same thing could be done when it comes to denominations, when it comes to traditions within the Christian faith. Because when you're just surrounded by everyone who is in a similar category as you, it's easy to think that, you know, you're pretty much the predominant folks because in that space you are. But once
Mm.
you start to step away and see, there are other types of Christianity, there are other, you know, ways of following Jesus and practicing this faith. I think my education in places like Wheaton, as well as just other friendships that I developed as a missionary kid, really contributed towards
Mm.
that awareness. And once you have that, it's a continually growing thing. It's not like you have it or don't have it, but as you grow in that awareness, I think it really helps you to own your baggage. It helps you to name some of the things that
Mm.
make you particular, and it helps you to not kind of lord that identity over other folks who don't fit, because you know that, in other contexts you wouldn't necessarily fit.
Mm.
And so when we're able to name our particular faith stream or faith tradition, then there are some really great benefits to that awareness, because then we can sort of start to look at the pros and cons of what we bring. Just like when I was overseas, I knew, okay, there's certain good things about being an American, and then there's certain bad things um, about it that I can't change just by talking about it differently. There's just things that um, folks associate with that group of people. And I think the same thing is true for evangelicalism. There's really great strengths that we bring that I talk about in the book, and then there's other things that we need to repent of, and sort of realize, maybe we can learn from other Christians on these issues.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think some people reading the book, it's that appreciation section that might be the most difficult for them. They're really in a
Hmm.
comfortable place criticizing evangelicalism for very legitimate reasons. And so I'd love to hear you talk too about, I love that in that section you talk about what remembering is biblically and collectively, and what that looks like to build a collective memory. Can you talk a little bit about why both that memory aspect, what it means to kind of have a collective memory and to remember, but also about why we need that kind of appreciation section? Because I can imagine a lot of people hearing you wrote a book about evangelicalism are like, great, let's just, deconstruct all the things that are a problem, which is very legitimate, and might really struggle with the appreciation section and kind of, do we need both the pros and the cons? Do we have to call it a mixed bag? Can we just look at it as purely negative? What is the kind
Yep.
of, positive value of appreciation?
Yep. Yeah, I think that I remember a time, I think it was in seminary, where one of the assignments was to visit a Eastern Orthodox church. And I had visited, a number of Catholic churches and other non-Protestant churches, but, going to a Greek Orthodox church for that assignment, I felt so out of place despite, being trained in all the things that evangelicals teach our kids about the Bible and Jesus and faith and worship and community. You enter this space and all of a sudden it felt like, wow, compared to this, like, the Catholic Church feels like super familiar. Like, I would understand like 20 times more what was going on in a Catholic service compared to this Eastern Orthodox service. And that's just me. And it kind of showed me, wow, like, there are things about our evangelical tradition that we kind of look over sometimes, like we sometimes gloss over, and we miss out on the strengths of, for example, things being very direct, very accessible, where God is near and God is within reach 24 hours a day. I mean, I just grew up with this assumption. Maybe you did too. You can pray to God anytime. You can sing to God or journal or talk about God anytime, and there doesn't have to be a pastor or priest there. You don't have to be in the church building. It can happen in many different ways. I've got how many different study Bibles and translations that help me to understand. There's different Bibles for different age groups. And it's really participatory, I think, more so, for example, than some of the other liturgical traditions that might feel a little bit like you're kind of spectating until you get to the Eucharist and then you participate. And there's many strengths that, of course, those traditions bring, in unity and history and connection with the global body of Christ. But I think the appreciation part was important for me in my own framework, because if it was just all bad, if evangelicalism was just all negative, then, like I said, I wouldn't have so many mixed feelings. And the book is all about ambivalence and mixed feelings and how to wrestle with that. And so when you experience something that's positive, for example, meeting Jesus and starting a relationship with the God of the universe through a particular stream, like, I think that can be put in the appreciation category. I'm glad that my parents became Christians in college, even though neither of them were raised in a Christian home. And it was through evangelical Christian ministries that they grew in their faith and learned about this thing that I take for granted because I was born into it. But without those evangelical folks sharing with them, my life could be really different in terms of um, how part of the faith I am and was growing up.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a professor in seminary who, when we went to go visit an Orthodox church in Dallas for a similar kind of experience, he was talking about how he had a friend who did campus ministry for a really long time. And he said a bunch of the freshmen would come in from these like high liturgical traditions, and they would end up in a low evangelical guitar strumming church because it was so different. It had something that they were missing. And then all these evangelical kids would come and they would end up at an Anglican or a Catholic church because they were missing the tradition and the liturgy. And he said that every year the same thing would happen. But the one thing that never happened that he so badly wanted to happen was for those two groups of kids to talk to each other, to kind of share what they were learning from each other's traditions that were positive, the things they missed, the things they loved about where they were coming from, because it was just sort of a singular trajectory from one to another, but they were missing the things that they loved about each other's, which I thought was such a good picture of that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, so the third section of the book is on repentance. And I feel like a lot of evangelicals right now are having conversations about communal repentance, about understanding what it means for a community to take responsibility for things we've been involved in. And I tweeted something yesterday about people leaving evangelicalism, what that means to them, what their stories have been. And a lot of what I heard was a tension between feeling responsible for a tradition and wanting to communally repent for a tradition, for not for the whole thing, like you said, but for the parts that were really wrong, but then struggling with people's own hurt over it. Like they were wondering what it looked like to, how do I communally repent for evangelicalism sins when I have been really deeply hurt by evangelicalism as
Oh,
well?
I know.
So do you have any thoughts about what we think about that? I mean, I think a lot of people are really on board with you when it comes to communal repentance, but want to know what that looks like for evangelicalism specifically.
Yeah, I think one of the experiences that I mentioned in those chapters on repentance is a video that played during the Urbana Student Mission Conference in 2018, and it was called A Litany. And the video just does a wonderful job at kind of setting up this idea of we did this idea of the church was part of this. And if we're part of the church, then even if on an individual level, you can't, say, I made this, personal decision to do this harm. Collectively, there are things that our group of Christians have been part of, whether it's slavery, whether it's genocide, whether it's, you know, putting Native Americans in boarding schools. There's all these things that we have to figure out. Okay, if we look at it communally, the way that Scripture often does, in terms of a whole community lamenting together, confessing together, repenting together, and then turning together in a new direction um, to follow God's Spirit, then there's a pattern for us there that helps us to address some of these, you know, sins and evils that we now recognize much more so as communal and systemic, and these patterns. And so the way that that video sets it up is, it's not that long of a video, but it really efficiently and powerfully lays out kind of a litany of different things so that you can then go into a time of corporate confession. You can have songs of lament. You can, all these things that we value um, will show up in, like, basically what we value will show up in church services. And this is your area too, right? Like, if we value it, it'll show up in sermons, it'll show up in books, it'll show up in worship songs, it'll show up in the order of service of how we do things, or what we do when we have conferences or when we have youth camps. So if we value things like corporate confession, in addition to individual confession, or corporate lament, um, in addition to the individual, why did this happen to me, God? Like, well, why did this happen to us? Or why did this happen to them because of us? Um, there's a whole rich uh, set of resources in scripture and church history to help guide us there. But it's something that, you know, took me however many years of my life to learn that it existed. But there are resources to get familiar in how to do this with your family, your group, your church, and then on a bigger scale, like a large event.
Hmm. Yeah. I also appreciate that you have those last two sections, repentance and then renewal, in part because I think there's just been so much written about evangelicalism lately that is critical, and again, very rightfully so, but doesn't give people a lot of resources for what to do next. There might be some resources for a pastor or for someone who's like the head of a denomination. Like, here are the instructions that we might give you to fix these problems that are here. But for the average person who's in an evangelical church, however you, again, define that, but they would know, right? They'd say, this is an evangelical church that I'm a part of. It's difficult. I was just talking to some college students a few weeks ago about spiritual disciplines and liturgies and our political engagement. And I felt like the lack of going, okay, I could tell this to a pastor and say, here's how you might want to think differently about what you're doing in your church. But for these college students who are really, grew up in a time where they're grappling with that political identity of evangelicalism, they don't have
Hmm.
control over what their church does or how they think about things. And some of them have an activist spirit. Like, some of them want to leave evangelicalism, go to a mainline church. Some of them don't want to, but they want to
Hmm.
change things. And so I appreciate that you
Hmm.
have this section. Could you talk a little bit about, like, practically what renewal looks like? Obviously it looks different in lots of different places, but how should people who aren't necessarily making all of the big decisions in the churches or institutions think about how they could be involved in renewal?
Yeah. Well, I think if you know someone that's been harmed by the church, maybe it's yourself, maybe it's someone else who's close to you, or a friend or family member. I would encourage you to just think, how was this person hurt by the church, and was there anything that could have made it different or less severe? Maybe it's something where if the person had known there are other options, that could have made a difference. So just having the awareness that we are not the only Christians, like that is a huge difference between folks who think if I leave my congregation, I'm leaving Jesus. If I leave my particular community of faith, I'm leaving Christianity. It's like, well, you're leaving a very important, spiritual home for you that has shaped you in your faith, but you're not necessarily um, leaving Jesus or leaving Christianity altogether, because there are these other options. So maybe, you know, there's an in between zone where instead of just, do I leave my church or go to a mainline church, there can be other options where it's like, well, maybe I take a break, maybe I'll visit, maybe I'll develop some friendships with people I know. Who are some people I know that go to a different type of church but still consider themselves followers of Jesus, or in the Christian broader tradition? Have those conversations to just start learning. And a lot of the times, awareness is half the battle, and just knowing that there are options and then communicating that to folks who are struggling. There are other options. And then a lot of the times folks may even stay, without necessarily completely leaving, just because they know they could leave if they needed to. They could find another place, that might work out better theoretically if they really need to. But maybe it's okay then for them to, um, make things work with where they're at. It's up to the person, of course, but maybe knowing that this church, this set of pros and cons that I see every Sunday, is not the only way. And it helps to know that you don't have to get everything in your spiritual diet from your church, or even from your denomination. I mean, I love my denomination, but we have weaknesses, and my faith is so much more sustainable and able to weather some of these storms because of resources and friendships, and um, just things that I've seen or read in other traditions. I have a spiritual director who's a Catholic woman who's wonderful, and we have these great conversations about you know what Protestants can learn from Catholics and what Catholics can learn from Protestants. And it really helps me to see that my tradition isn't all rotten to the core, because there are things that my Catholic friends want to learn more about and say, oh wow, how do you do that, and how do you make that more meaningful? Because I think evangelicals, we underestimate how much we value the meaning and how much we desire things to be, um, in harmony with what matters to us. And I think that's where the distance comes from, is because we have a strength of wanting things to be better and continually trying to renew and seek, um, to follow Jesus more closely.
Yeah, it's been interesting coming from an evangelical seminary to now a very not evangelical divinity school, and having so many people say to me, wow, I like plenty of criticisms. There's plenty of people who don't love the place I came from or don't love that I'm an evangelical. But the ones who say positive things, it tends to always be, wow, I wish I had learned the Bible as well as you learned the Bible. Like they were coming
Mm,
from a tradition that didn't do that as much. And I'll offhand say something that makes clear to them that I know, if there's anything my church has taught me or my seminary taught me, it was like knowing all of the Bible. And it's been really lovely to kind of realize like, oh yeah, I am very thankful for that. Not that that is exclusive to evangelicals, but that is a good gift that my tradition and my background gave me.
yes.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit too about, if we are thinking more structurally, or for pastors, or for someone who has some kind of ability to influence things? I think a lot of people at this moment are looking at everything that's happening and they're thinking, is this the moment for renewal, or is this the moment that we just need to let everything, like we need to let it all burn away? Are we rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic by trying to make
Hmm.
little tweaks to evangelicalism when really
Yes.
the whole thing is just kind of rotten to the core? How would you speak to people who, because maybe someone going to a church, they can kind of decide for themselves if they stay in that church or they go somewhere else. But there are a lot of people I know who are pastors or in some way institutionally affiliated with evangelical, the whole culture, kind of wondering, is what I'm doing meaningful, or is this whole thing just kind of not, God is not with us, this isn't something I should be trying to sustain?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are some tough decisions, and I don't think it's an easy answer, unfortunately. I think there are folks who I love and respect who might give a different answer, and that would be a great conversation. Why do you think it's rotten to the core? And I might, agree with a lot of their valid points and reasons for, deciding to leave it behind. I think for me personally, um, there are some really practical reasons why I'm just tethered to evangelicalism through my work and my job and my vocation. Um, so I have a lot more privilege than a lot of folks, but also it's a lot harder maybe to leave than folks who maybe have a different situation. I think that I'm an Enneagram 9, so I see ways that things can work. I see ways that, two things that seem to be contradictory can actually both be true. And I
Mm.
think that it can both be um, really poisoned and rotten for a lot of folks. And when they leave and want to start something new, I bless them and say, yeah, that could be part of the solution, is to really let this go for you. Um, for others of us, I'm not ready. In my particular case, I'm not ready to let InterVarsity go or the Evangelical Covenant Church go, because I see God working there, and I see really positive signs of hope in the midst of the brokenness and things that are also at the same time embarrassing and not healthy. There's enough there that gives me hope, but I've also had the privilege of being able to, over time, kind of shift my location to where I am now, which not everyone has the privilege of doing. So I think depending on where you're at, if you're not able to kind of make some of those changes to surround yourself in a better place, then I can see why, a more significant step might be understandable. So that's kind of a non that's kind of a non-answer, except to say, you know, just be honest with yourself about where you're located and if it's life-giving, or what, try to figure out what is life-giving and what is not. And does the life-giving outweigh what's not life-giving? And are there other options where it could be more life-giving? But don't just, make that decision really rashly without thinking both about pros and cons, because the answer can really vary. So I'm not telling everybody in the book, like, you must stay with evangelicalism, because, you know, for me, the scales are tipped in favor of staying, so it must also be the case for you. Like, no, that's just because of who I am in my positionality. So for other folks, it might not be that way at all, and it might be more life draining than life giving. So that's another decision that's kind of up up to each person to decide, hopefully with their community and others involved in the conversation.
Yeah, that's always the kind of difficult, impossible, actually, question to answer. Is like, should people leave or should they stay? It's a question of discernment. So I appreciate that. And even the last thought that I had was like, I'm not going to ask you, should people leave or should they stay? That's, totally impossible. But like I said, I tweeted yesterday some of these questions because your book had got me thinking about, like, what do we mean when we say we're leaving evangelicalism? If it's not a
Mm,
single tradition or a single church, like, it means something very different for different people to kind of make that decision. It could be leaving a church or a seminary or an institution. It could mean I'm at the same place, but I don't use the label, or I'm trying to unlearn some things.
mhm,
Um, and so I kind of thought, oh, we'll have this interesting conversation about how we use this word. And instead, what I overwhelmingly got, which I should have anticipated, was just people's pain. It was just people sharing how difficult and painful it has been for them to leave a church, or for them to leave a community, or for, even if they're at the same church, to feel like they don't belong anymore with the people they thought they belonged with. And it was eye opening to me to realize that I'm a nerd. I can switch really quickly between the pain I have experienced from the church and interesting theoretical questions about what we do about things. But most people are not like me. And I think a lot of us really right now are in a place of just pain. That wasn't just 2016 or 2020, but over those last few years, people have been had their eyes open to things that were always there. And then some things have changed and they really suddenly feel like they don't belong in the place that they are in. What would you say pastorally to those people who aren't asking the question, do I leave or do I stay? But just, I'm in pain. Evangelicalism has hurt me in these ways. And I don't really know what to do next.
Oh man, I've had that conversation with so many folks because evangelicalism has and continues to cause a lot of pain. Um, and so I think it's wonderful when people can recognize that A, that's where the pain is coming from, and B, that that's what's making it difficult to even engage the question of staying or leaving. Because for the folks I know who have left personally, like the pain hasn't gone away. Like it doesn't necessarily solve it, even though maybe that was the right decision for them to find another space. What really breaks my heart is when people leave despite wanting to stay. Like that just, you know, really hurts me because there are folks who are trying to make it work. They're trying to stay, but they're just too different. They don't conform enough to what their church or what their community of faith expects. And so when people have to leave or they're pushed out like against their will, that just should not happen. Like anyone who wants to stay and is trying actively to make this their spiritual home and find a way to make it work. Like we have so many denominations and so many ways of doing church, especially in the United States, but around the world too. Like there has to be a place for you somewhere. And that's on us, those of us who are part of, you know, cooking up the recipe and figuring out how to do church. Like that's on us if we are saying to people like, there's no place in the church for you, even if you want to be here. It's one thing if, you know, someone's just had enough and they realize, okay, this isn't my cup of tea. I'm going to, you know, I had a friend in college who went to the Eastern Orthodox tradition and it was really life giving. And that made a lot of sense. And, you know, that's great. But when there's so much pain, like I definitely do not want to be in a position to tell people to sympathize with the institution that hurt you, like a Stockholm syndrome thing. Like, don't feel bad for the church when they did this to you. Um, and also, don't criticize yourself and be so hard on yourself for wanting to stay and be part of it, even though you know that it's such a source of pain. So, those are really tough conversations that really, I guess, vary case by case. But just, I would just say no, that you're not alone. There are many people who face this, and there are options. And hopefully, if we do a better job of renewal and repentance, we can communicate that there are options. But I also understand when people say, that's not the evangelicalism that I'm in. I'm not in the type of evangelicalism that gives options. I'm not in the Wheaton colleges or the places that say, hey, look at these denominations and see which ones you agree or disagree with on any number of theological choices. Like, that's a really, really tough thing. However, with the internet and technology that gives us more access to those choices, hopefully there are ways to get in touch with um, a type of faith that resonates more. And also, maybe it's just resources that help you to make better sense of where you're at and possibly continue without too much changing on the outside, but having a lot transformed within you to kind of reframe what's going on and what's been happening to you.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. Beth Moore, who could write a million books about church pain and difficulty, responded to that thread and gave just a really beautiful description of her own experience in another tradition and kind of
You
went,
got
I don't know
Beth
that
Moore
this,
to respond to you. That's great.
it was my lucky day. But
Awesome.
she described like how even if it's just for a period of time, being in another tradition was healing in a unique way that nothing else really could do. That when this was the tradition that hurt you, she needed to be in another place. And not to kind of lecture people that like you should still be going to church, but to recognize that there are gifts to being a part of a church, and you don't have to give up all of those things and just leave those things behind because the tradition that you're in has hurt you so much that it's not healthy for you to stay there. So I appreciate how
Yes.
often you have said, like, at the end of the day, you do not have to stay in the church that you are in, but know that there are life-giving forms of community out there, and you have options in what you can do, which I do think a lot of people did not grow up hearing. Thank you so much, Dan, for talking today. Thank you for writing this book and for speaking so well to people who are in pain.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Kaitlyn. It's been an honor to be on here.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Phil Vischer Enterprises, that's Phil's company, and Skye Pilot Media, that's Skye's company. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/holypost. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, and more.